the Holyoke School Committee. Calling this meeting to order at 5 o'clock. Roll call, please.
Mayor Garcia,
Here.
Mr. Sheehan,
Present.
and Dr. Rivera Colon.
Here, all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Flag.
On March 29, 2023, Governor Healy signed into law a supplemental budget bill, which, among other things, extends the temporary provisions pertaining to the open meeting law to March 31st, 2025. Specifically, this further extension allowed public bodies to continue holding meetings remotely without a quorum of the public body physically present at a meeting location, and to provide adequate alternative access to remote meetings. The language does not make any substantive changes to the open meeting law other than extending the expiration date of the temporary provisions regarding remote meetings from March 31st, 2023 to March 31st, 2025. Pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Section 20, I'm hereby informing all attendees that a video and audio recording is being made of this meeting and is live streamed via Zoom. First question, do we have the commissioner or any of the representatives from DESE online?
No.
Good evening, Dr. Rivera Colon.
Hello and welcome,
Hey,
Commissioner Johnston and Lauren Wu.
Hey,
How are you?
Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Are you ready for our updates?
Oh yes, we were already joined, but just not as panelists, so we're great. Yes.
Hey.
Great, thank you. So this time I divided the agenda based on the matching the work streams that we already had in the plan, so that way it's easy to follow along. So for our first work stream, we had superintendent hiring, and I was nervous to put this in the agenda, but this is to prepare for the process of hiring for everybody who's listening. We have our final community advisory team with the members that we were hoping we were going to have. So that's finalized. And we always also have the external vendor facilitation for the meetings that has been approved by the committee as well. Questions about that one before I move forward?
No, just more overall. I want to just continue to encourage this subcommittee as well as the full committee really to proceed with the idea in mind that we are committed to helping this this transition occur at the end of June, right, for July 1st. And so we really want to make sure that you just continue to apply the effort that you are applying to all aspects of this transition plan, making adjustments as necessary. Like we've talked about along the way, it's a living document. But remember, especially as it relates to the superintendent, that we provide, it takes some time to establish what the plan will be for selecting a superintendent. And so we couldn't announce the end of receivership in October and have it take place in October, because we need to give you time to work on several things, and most notably this piece. So, I've heard some questions about is there any hedging from the department? Far from it. We are very committed to supporting this process, and really just want to encourage you to keep going, encourage you to, keep doing the work that you're doing and make adjustments along the way, and really use this as that great opportunity to establish your plan for, getting through this process will lead you to the final exit decision in July, right? And it's really important to me that, to have that exit happen, obviously you have to have a superintendent. That's just common sense. And so, but we want to work together with you to make sure that everything is in place and in line so that you have that superintendent named. long before July 1st. And we can then line everything up behind that. There's sort of a cascade effect to naming the superintendent comes along. I think it's important to note just all of the key people in the district who also, will be associated with a decision like that, who really, always want to know who the leader is going to be and want to be a part of a team. So it is important to forge ahead just as you are, really with the idea that this is that time period to get this piece worked out to be ready for just a seamless transition. July 1 comes, and my goal is that we've lined everything up so well that we just move right into a post receivership world on July 1st, 2025.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Mayor Garcia.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And Commissioner, as he talks, he raises an interesting point. I'm thinking here, we never really, as a public body, really talked about this around timing. We have a process currently that's going to engage feedback from the public, and I'm thinking out loud here. And we get that information, let's say around March, April time. And is it realistic to think that, considering that we're so hyper vigilant and focused on this transition, is it responsible? Does it make sense for us to focus on that transition and do a search at the same time? Or, as a group, maybe even talk about, I don't know. I think there's a lot of different options on the table. If we were to do I don't know if you can do a 6 months or you can do a 1-year interim contract. So we can solely focus on the transition and worry less about whether or not we're going to have a superintendent hit the ground running on July 1. Because I feel like there's two things. There's the actual transition, and then there's the key person in that position to help facilitate that. I feel like are two different lack of better terms, work streams, where I just want to focus on this transition. So that's an interesting point about time, something we never really talked about, and curious to hear from you guys, from this body, really, how do we want to manage this? How do we want to mitigate this issue? Concern.
Mr. Sheehan.
So I guess my opinion on that, and I think that more with the timeline that we're talking about, like if it's the school committee's desire to do a search for a permanent superintendent effective July 1, I personally feel as though that process has to be started by January 1st. And I mean started like contracting with a search firm, getting a committee together. Like if you think about a January 1 doing that, you're doing screening, you're probably doing a 30-day posting, screening in mid-February, public interviews and site visits in March, negotiations in April for a July 1st start date. So that doesn't really go in line with the community advisory team's role. So I think it really, and I've said this from the beginning when I was appointed, I think in June, that like we may have to look at the fact that it may be an interim superintendent for a year. We can contract whatever we want, but I personally, Devin Sheehan speaking, I think it's probably a year that we'd want someone. But I still think that whoever that person's going to be, there needs to be some sort of interview process of that person. That's my opinion with it. And I think that that's done a little bit differently than you would for something that's permanent. I don't know if the commissioner has any different thoughts. He's been through this as a superintendent, going through a search process. He's seen lots of them. Like, I don't know if there's any different thoughts in your mind just with time frame, but it seems to really get, especially like when you think about someone in an executive level position, possibly having to leave a job, sometimes has to give 60-day notice. Like there's all sorts of different requirements.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Mayor Garcia.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mr. Sheehan. And I'm glad that we're talking about this in terms of, again, this is where thinking about the transition plan as a living document, a document that needs to be adjusted, so that things make sense and line up well. So everything that you're hitting on right now, I think is important to continue to delve into. And overall, I would say that starting a superintendent search process in the spring is getting late. And again, like I said, I really want to make sure that, what's on my mind a lot is frankly just making sure that this transition promotes stability in the district, and that we can see that, I think to the mayor's point that, making sure that we have a solid process for community engagement and getting that input, that you've laid out a timeline that will take that into March, can be separated from making a decision, perhaps sooner than that, sooner than the spring around an interim role. And so just to be clear with you all, I am open to hearing more thoughts from this committee on that interim idea. I'm glad you raised it, Mayor Garcia. And, I think that Mr. Sheen, you're hitting on, sort of, building on the idea. I don't think that you have to sort it out exactly tonight. But I think I would really encourage this committee and the full committee, encourage this subcommittee and the full committee to continue to delve into this idea. Again, really promoting the stability of the work, stability of the team are very important to me as we move forward. Making sure that we are kind of like seeing timing and the impact of different aspects of the work and adjusting accordingly. So all of this makes sense to me, and I'm very encouraging of you to continue this conversation.
Mayor Garcia.
So I guess I mean, is it safe to assume that it's unrealistic to think that we're going to be undergoing a superintendent search process?
Mr. Sheehan. Go ahead.
That's my opinion, but it's only opinion of one of 9 people. Like, I mean, it's up to the committee with that. I mean,
Well, there is.
in theory, we could start it. I mean, theoretically, we could start a search in March or April, and possibly not have someone hired for July 1st and still have an interim until September. But it's more like we need to decide, or I think we need to talk about what makes the most sense. Is it, and we call it interim? Do we call it a transitional superintendent to help with the transition? Like, it's any of these types of things. Like, do we want a full year of this? So I think it could be. It's more hearing from 9 other people.
Right. No, the reason why I was asking is that this is the working group where we hash this out so we can report back and have that conversation with the school board. But I'm just saying, as far as us is concerned, having a conversation, I think we are in agreement that, we should have that conversation, understanding it might not be likely we'll be able to do a full search.
I think it's also important to have the community advisory team have that as one of their bullets. I mean, if we got a report back from them saying that they've heard from the community and their expectation is that a superintendent search is done for a permanent leader as soon as possible, I think that would help guide my decision in a different way as well. Like, I mean, I think we at least have to have them be open to the thought that is hiring a permanent superintendent for July 1st something that's a priority to them, or is the priority transitioning and having an interim leader and having a extensive superintendent search that runs the academic, like that runs and it starts, like, even if you look at what's going on in East Hampton right now, they started a search process in October. They're offering a position out on the 17th of December for a July 1st start date. I mean, so that's not unheard of. I mean, you can start them early and have someone waiting as well. So I think some of that is hearing from the group that we established to help guide some of this. And I don't know if they've met yet. Have they?
No, communication just went out so the contracts finally was done, and they're right now facilitating it for their first meeting. So even if the group came back and said, yeah, absolutely, we want to see we'll do a superintendent search. I don't want to rush it. If the recommendations come back to have one done by July 1, this is a great opportunity for us, and I want us to do it right. I don't want to rush it because the committee came back and said, we want you to have a permanent by July 1. I think the responsible thing to do is to allow this committee to do their work, and us as a body focus on this transition. And if we have to appoint somebody on the interim temporarily until we get those recommendations, and when we do get the recommendations, we can do our work to do a good search process for a permanent person. Um, Allow those to kind of work hand in hand. So, me personally speaking, Joshua Garcia, not speaking for everybody or for the body, I do strongly feel that um, it wouldn't be a terrible idea if we just appoint the current guy we have now 1 year. And again, we got to talk about this as a group, see what everybody says. 1 year interim so that we can solely focus on the transition because it's gonna be bumpy. And we want to be sure that that the guy that we do know who's in there currently that's been doing all the work that we all know and trust can help smooth out those edges as much as possible um, into July. And then once we're into July, now new fiscal year, we get the recommendations back just before that, and then we can start a much more formal search process, like comfortably knowing that the day to day is being taken care of. We're not worried about any, you know, anything major. Um, so that ideally, that's kind of what I'm thinking. But either way, I think as a small committee, we should decide what we want to report back so we can have this conversation with the full body and make a decision, you know, soon. Um, so um, so that folks in the administration, people in that office know what they're dealing with, and whether or not they should be looking for another job, or they should be facilitating a search, or they should be. There's a lot of unknowns at the moment, and I think those unknowns are not good for focusing on what we need to do for the transition. So, yeah, as I think just as a committee, I'm glad you're bringing this up, but we should figure this out and report back to the full board and see what they want to do.
And Mayor Garcia, if I could chime in there, Dr. Rivera Colon, are you okay if I
Yes.
build on that?
Go ahead.
So from my vantage point, seeing districts all across the state and then thinking about the uniqueness of this transition for Holyoke, what I wouldn't want to see is a series of superintendents. So the idea of offering an interim contract to Mr. Soto right now as a way to then bridge towards having a full search that we kick off after the end of receivership is much more palatable to me because, like I said, what's core for me is the idea of stability and that the continuation of the work, and that's why we've said I feel confident ending receivership even though the work needs to continue, is because of you're already on a pathway. Both the school committee and the school department have a lot of the right things in place to continue the work, and I think I would be concerned about if you were to propose to have, an interim, Mr. Soto right now, an interim superintendent, and then a permanent superintendent. In my experience, that is very destabilizing. And Mayor Garcia, like you were saying, this is not just the consequence of the superintendent themselves; it's also the team who is working with that superintendent. So again, just speaking off the cuff, and I'm not a voting member, but I I care very much about where this goes, and I want to have just nothing but confidence. And this group has always given me confidence at every step along the way that this is the right thing. So there is a pivotal decision to make right now. I do think, again, just watching what happens across the state, the best candidates are more available in the kind of fall winter time, and certainly less. You're going to have a stronger applicant pool, I do believe, than when you start a search in the spring. So again, just building on what you're saying here tonight, I just want to be clear that I would like to see. I would not want to see 3 transitions from my vantage point. I just don't think that would be healthy for the district. And so glad to hear any thoughts or feedback on that, but just want to make sure that you just continue to do the same solid planning and adjustments that you've done all along the way, and including this piece to make it work for the transition and beyond.
Thank you. Mr. Sheehan.
Yeah, and I am very comfortable with this committee, and I would support a recommendation from the committee that to the full committee that we consider and I'm not making a motion yet, I'm just talking, that we would consider a interim superintendent from July 1, 2025 to June 30th, 2026. I'm not at the point to discuss the competencies of any individuals for that position or an individual, and that's just, I'm not, whether we have a great candidate or not, I'm just not at that point that we should be doing that, because I still think that there's a discussion for the full committee with it. But I think that I would be definitely supportive of an interim position. I fully agree with the thought that we need stability and leadership, and we need all of those things. I'm just not ready at this juncture, at this meeting especially, discuss any individual, because I also think we need to discuss as a committee, like, what that process. I believe there should still be some sort of process. It could be, you can have a one-person interview process, like a one-person interviews, so the committee can ask questions, but I just think there needs to be something. So I mean, if you wanted it, I'd be willing to make that motion for the committee to consider it, but I'm not at the point of individualizing it.
I think for our next meeting, I did speak with Vice Chair Mildred about possibly having an executive session meeting to talk about um non-union collective bargaining contracts.
That's not under our purview.
Yeah,
Full committee has no purview under anything non-union.
yeah, but we go into executive session, we can we're transitioning, so it's
Nope.
So you're saying we can't have a meeting on non-union?
They're not under our purview. They're not under our purview if we were transitioned. If we were on July 1st, non-union contracts
So,
aren't under our
not
purview.
purview or not, we can still go into executive session and talk about non-union contract collective bargaining. Or
Non-union people don't
contracts.
collectively bargain. There's no such thing. The only people that collectively bargain are union.
Non-union contracts.
Non-union contracts are not under the school committee's authority.
That's fine. We can still go into executive session and talk about non-union contracts. No?
No,
Why not?
they're not in our authority.
If I
This is
could,
not a part of the agenda today.
So we'll talk more about it, Devin, and I'll fill you in, get you up to speed. But either way, you know, regardless of if you think A or B, the idea was to have a conversation, executive session, with and talk about maybe that's something that we can all include this in there and talk about as well, um, with the school board. But hearing your concern, we'll
We
iron
can't-
that out.
We can't have conversations about a superintendency in executive session. The position of the superintendent, the only time you can have something in a closed session is a screening committee made up of less than a majority members of the school committee. If you did a screening committee with the majority members of the school committee, it's an open session. You cannot discuss anything other than the actual negotiation for superintendent in executive session.
I'll confirm that.
You can confirm whatever you want, but the Attorney General's office is very clear that superintendents are not, their position, even their competency,
Mhm.
can be discussed in open session. That's why the evaluation process. I mean, no superintendent.
The evaluation process, when you're talking about contracts, just contractual discussions, we can talk about that.
If we have one. I mean, I won't go to that meeting.
Yeah, we can confirm that, Devin. It doesn't it's not anything for you to feel one way or another or assume anything. It's just we're trying to figure these things out. And whatever the concerns are, we can iron out and make sure that we do things accordingly and appropriately. There's nobody.
But figuring out things on the guise of a closed session is not something that is appropriate.
Yeah, but I think the way you're interpreting it though, Devin, is making it ideally what we want to do is have a conversation about uh but you know if we're having contractual discussions, right, having an executive session discussion so it doesn't, but it's not anything where we're trying to hide or trying to cover or trying to close or trying anything. It's what is it that we can and can't do in executive session so we can get over this and try to move forward in what we're trying to achieve here.
That's okay, but that's not part of our agenda tonight.
Oh, but the reason why I was bringing it up is, we're talking about, um, you know, uh, making a recommendation and what we want to do, with this particular position and having a conversation with the full body. And that's why I was bringing it up because I had that conversation about possibly doing an executive session discussion and seeing if this is something we can include. Devin is bringing up some potential concerns that we'll certainly look into, and make sure we're not doing anything we're not supposed to be doing. Um, but in the merit of what we want to do, if we were to make a recommendation just out of this group, not necessarily on process, from what I'm hearing, and I agree, we can talk about it with the full board, but instead a recommendation from this group saying, hey, let's explore possible interim, um, to start July 1 until we can get feedback from the advisory committee as far as what we want to do as a body on a permanent basis. Am I correct? Yep.
And then one thing that is a concern for me in terms of the community advisory team and whatever steps we move forward is that whatever it is are going to be the desire of the body, we have to let them know right away. Because
Say
I
it
don't
again, say it again.
that whatever is the desire of the body, whether it's going to be an interim or if we're going to do a search or whatever the body decides, we need to make sure that that is communicated to the community advisory team right away. Because I don't want them to think that we're having them do work that we're not going to use.
Right.
Because that would be really detrimental to the process.
Yeah, no, and no question. I think, this is about the transfer of power July 1 to this board and making sure we have someone in that role hitting the ground running, whether if it's permanent or an interim. And so, following it's a moving target, right? Like if we can get this group moving quickly enough in a perfect world, by January we get recommendations, and like Devin alluded to, we'd have to start a good process by January if we want a permanent by July 1. It doesn't seem like that's realistic, without pressuring this committee. Now we're talking about, well, hey, why not an interim? And we need to communicate that with the group.
Right.
They fully understand and are aware. To your point, they don't feel like, what's the point, right? Like they got to understand, you know. So you're right.
So what's going to be a recommendation for the full school committee? Because this conversation has to happen soon.
Yeah.
So that then we can communicate with the community advisory team and then let them know what is it that their efforts, where they're going to go.
Yep. So the recommendation would be, to explore, um, the idea of getting an interim for July 1 if we can't move quickly enough for a permanent person to start July 1, right? Am I getting that right?
So is it, if we can't move quickly enough, or is this what we want? Like, so recommending a plan, is it knowing that because we could start in January, we could say, we're not going to listen to the community advisory committee to start with January.
That's not what we want. We're not recommending
So
that
the
as a group.
recommendation is the committee is to have an interim appointment for July 1. It's not, if we can't, that's what it is, right? That's kind of what I heard. Ability,
I
right?
think, I
Right.
think, I think that's same difference. I think we're saying the same thing, Devin.
We just have to make it clear.
So make the motion.
Right.
Right, that the school board explored having a candidate July 1. What was the second part there?
That was it. Interim.
Interim
Interim.
July 1. Something else you just said.
So
All right, that's
you
what
had
it
said
is.
if we can't.
Right.
Sounds good. So
Motion.
that we go back to the school board with a recommendation that we explore having someone start July 1 as an interim candidate. And there's more to this conversation that we'll be
Second.
bringing
Right,
back.
but we need to be
Yeah.
able to refer it to the full committee so that
Yeah.
then we can talk
The
about
next
it.
meeting,
So it's
January
second?
13th.
Yes. So do I have a second?
Second.
Favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Irene, were you able to get the motion? Perfect. Because it was, I just wanted to make sure. Wonderful. Okay, moving on. to Workstream 2, Superintendent Evaluation. Our superintendent receiver proposed professional practice goals, student learning goal, and the district improvement goals, and they were approved by the full school committee. We have had a very active policy subcommittee, and right now for Workstream 3, Policy Development, Policy and Governance Subcommittee, they met and reviewed Section A and B. These are foundations and basic commitments and board governance and operations. The sections will be available to the school committee and receiver for review at the beginning of December. Each section will be reviewed first pass by the school committee at upcoming meetings. Section C, General School Administration, and Section D, Final Management, will be reviewed on December 18th, and the goal is to complete both sections, and if there are any remaining topics, they will be moved to January 25th. So the chair of our policy subcommittee is here, so I wanted to acknowledge that she was here, and also school committee member Isasa. Thank you so much for both being here. And also thank you so much for all the work that you have been doing with the policy subcommittee. Workstream 4, Finance and Budget. Our Finance and Operations Subcommittee has been working really hard on this as well. Facilities Development, developing capital plan, held meeting to review process. We established the threshold for budget transfers, and that was approved by the full school committee. Budget guidelines discussion, we have full committee feedback as well. They also work on the payroll projection. They completed that. Development of quarterly reports underway. Bi-monthly reports from July, August, and September, October presented to the subcommittee. Subcommittee approved the budget guidelines and priorities. And they also discussed protocol for warrant signing. And as part of collective bargaining, there has been put together a planning team by the district, and Mr. Sheehan was appointed to this planning team. We did both of the trainings that were scheduled, the one for budget and superintendent evaluation. And that's all I got, Commissioner. Any questions or concerns? And we're going strictly by the plan.
You sure are. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate all that this team is doing. I did want to forecast one issue and really, I think, an opportunity, which is around collective bargaining, which we're excited to have kick off in the new year. And we know that that is, very timely as we look at this transition as well. And I'm wondering, I want to put on the table tonight the idea of we're going to go back to executive session again, and going into executive session for the purpose of discuss strategy relative to collective bargaining, so that there could be more information for the entire body about what currently exists in the collective bargaining agreement. And then what's also important to note is that I've said all along that there are provisions of the turnaround plan that I as commissioner can keep in place post receivership. And that also sort of dovetails with, or potentially dovetails with, what's in the current collective bargaining agreement and where you might go in the future. And I'm not tipping my hand to say that I am, sold that I want one feature or another of the turnaround plan, particularly anything that relates to things like teacher compensation, to be in place post receivership. But I will be making some informed decisions about which aspects of the turnaround plan need to be kept in place post receivership. And it does relate to the bargaining that you are about to undertake. And so I think it could be useful for the committee to have an executive session to delve into and better kind of understand that connection between the part of the turnaround plan that connects to your current collective bargaining agreement that was ratified most recently, but is now expiring. And I think that would really set the negotiations team up well for going into negotiations, to have to have the board and to have the school committee informed, to take input from the school committee. Seems like a useful thing to do prior to the negotiations kicking off, and also really in the spirit of no surprises, right? That our ability to kind of work together through this transition and collective bargaining being a part of it is going to be is vital, right, to the continued success of the district. And so just putting all the pieces together through an executive session for the purposes of strategy related to contract negotiations, I think
Right.
would be advisable as you start to look into the beginning of the new calendar year.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Sheehan.
Yeah, so just, and I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear this, but actually the receiver and I were actually having a conversation after our last meeting about planning that for mid-January, right after the new year at some point, to have that type of session and those discussions around collective bargaining and the, especially once the planning committee kind of meets and talks, we can bring something from that with his team so we can discuss those aspects of it. I guess one thing just with that though, that maybe we still might need some guidance from you. We've talked about this a little bit at other meetings, is that we have started having the discussion about a request for services for school committee legal counsel. Now that is also could look different depending on some of the things that you just spoke about around the turnaround plan and pieces that you may keep in post receivership. So it's something that I think that we may need some clarity from on your office just about moving forward and pursuing that opportunity. Now, going out and looking doesn't commit us to anything, but it's also the work being put into it. So we just want to be open with if we're going to pursue school committee legal counsel for collective bargaining, just so we can be kind of open and transparent with whoever may be coming on, that there's also this other aspect as well from your office. And it's just something that we probably need to hash out at our this next meeting to talk about. I don't expect an answer from you tonight, but it's just the type of thing that we need to kind of figure that out with that balance.
Absolutely. So just to comment on that, a few things. One is my colleague Lauren Wu, who's here with us tonight. Dr. Wu has been a part of the negotiations in Holyoke throughout the receivership process over the past many years. And so her historical knowledge and kind of being able to make that bridge between what's in the turnaround plan and the current collective bargaining agreement, I think will be really useful to the Holyoke School Committee. And so I know that Lauren's ready, very willing to do that work that you just described, Mr. Sheehan. And so glad for that to happen in January, just like you described. And I had heard that there might be some interest in transition, putting out that RFR for, or the request for proposals for council, for new council. And, we will support what the school committee wants to do there. It is important that there's a good match between the school committee and the council representing them. We would just ask to make sure that there's a strong transition. There is a switch in the role of council for the school committee going into the future. That would we'd want to make sure there's a good transition. I would also say that with all of this, what's important to me though is that, that we move this ahead, that we don't sort of use any of this as a rationale for not engaging in bargaining as we start the new calendar year. It's important to me that we work solidly together with all due haste, but thoughtfully, to have a new contract in place, because it's obviously a very important thing for the educators of Holyoke. So we are ready to continue to advance this work in January, just like you described. And we want to make sure that we are working together to come to the table and support that process. We very much want to see a contract in place by the time that we're transitioning out of receivership. So that contract by July 1 is my expectation that can be achieved. And I know there are factors that go into that, but I think that should be our starting point of let's get this done by July 1, so it's in place. And we'd like to see, all parties working together to make that happen.
Thank you. Mr.
In,
Mayor.
in the spirit of seeking guidance, Commissioner, or this idea of collective bargaining, discussing strategy, executive session. We talked about the interim super talked about, made comments about on union content, whatever. So I'm wondering, can you, is that something you can look into for us too as well? Like, sounds like it's all kind of connected one way or another. Talk about these core things in our transition, to keep to maintain stability. What can be discussed and like what should be or can be discussed in executive session or not, and you know, to point to Devin's concerns and concerns of the public. Is that anything you can offer some guidance on us too, to make sure that we're moving forward this minefield, that you know that we're
Yes.
taking the important steps, but also not bringing on any liability to the city or anything?
Yeah, we're always happy to assist with any type of support like that. I think an important distinction is that since we don't represent the district, there's, you know, we can certainly give some parameters and some ideas, and then you know, sometimes we have had, you know, we can have a more direct conversation even with an attorney who represents a district anywhere in the Commonwealth, including Holyoke. So at the end of the day, we'd want to make sure that your attorney is solidly behind any plan for going into executive session, because ultimately, if there's any kind of challenge, that would be the person working with you more directly. In any case, whether wherever the state is involved or not. So yes, we have a lot of knowledge about open meeting law. We are glad to follow up. And at the end of the day, it's probably something that you still want to make sure your counsel is solidly behind you in the direction you take.
Thank you so much. So with that, we make it to the approval of the minutes from our previous meetings.
Second. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. So with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Motion adjourned.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank
Thank you so much, and
Thanks,
thank you,
Commissioner.
Commissioner, for being here and for your guidance as well.
Thank you for all your hard work. Really encouraged. Keep it going. Have a great holiday season.
Will do.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Happy holidays. Bye-bye.